Welcome to the Public Health Practice Gap, the podcast where we examine the growing divide between what we know improves health and the systems, environments, and incentives that continue pushing society in the exact opposite direction. I am your host, Dr. Bradley Fevrier, and today we are talking about something that almost everyone listening to this feels every single day, but very few people fully understand from a structural level: the inability to focus, the exhaustion that comes from constant notifications, the reflexive urge to check your phone every 3 minutes, the strange, unsettling feeling of being completely mentally overwhelmed, while simultaneously feeling deeply understimulated. Because the reality is this: we are living inside the largest unregulated behavioral experiment in human history, and most people do not realize they are the participants. Today's episode is called The Attention Crisis: Why Constant Stimulation is Reshaping Behavior. This episode is a massive expansion of newsletter 14 of the NextGen Public Health Brief, but we are going much deeper today, because this is not just a conversation about technology. It is not just about smartphones or social media or social algorithms. This is a conversation about cognition, emotional regulation, behavioral conditioning, childhood development. It is about workforce performance, the fraying of our social fabric, and the architecture of modern life itself. And here is the central question I want us to wrestle with for the next few minutes. What happens to a society when distraction is not just a habit, but a default environment? Let me start with a very simple, slightly uncomfortable observation. Most people today cannot sit in silence for more than a few minutes. Think about that carefully. Walk through a normal day in 2026. You step into an elevator. The phone comes out. You sit in a waiting room. The phone comes out. A commercial break interrupts your show. The phone comes out. Standing in line for coffee. Phone. Walking into the bathroom. Phone. Even the micro moments of our day, the moments that used to allow for reflection, for boredom, or for mental recovery, have now been completely filled with stimulation. At first glance, this might seem harmless. It is just checking an email, right? It is just catching up on the news. But public health has always understood something fundamental about human nature. Behavior does not emerge in isolation. Behavior is shaped by environments. It is shaped by incentives, by repeated exposure, and by underlying systems. And the modern digital environment is one of the most rigorously, successfully, behaviorally engineered environments ever created by human beings. This was not an accident. It is intentional. Every vibration in your pocket, every red notification badge, every autoplay feature that rolls the next video before you can blink, every infinite scroll, every algorithmic recommendation that magically knows exactly what you want to see next. All of it is designed to do exactly one thing: capture and retain your attention. Because in the modern economy, attention is not just a metaphor. Attention is currency. And once attention becomes monetized, human focus itself becomes an extractive commercial resource. Think about mining of coal or drilling for oil. We are now drilling for human focus, and that changes everything about how we live. Here's a fascinating paradox. The average person today consumes more information in a single day than many people centuries ago consumed in months. But despite having access to all that information, many of us feel less mentally clear, less emotionally regulated, less capable of sustained deep focus. Why? Because information overload is not the same thing as cognitive nourishment, and stimulation is not the same thing as fulfillment. Let's talk biology for a moment. Because to understand the public health gap here, you have to understand the hardware we are running. Human beings evolved in environments that were radically different from the ones we now inhabit. Our brains, our nervous system evolved around slower information flow. We evolved from physical interactions, natural circadian rhythms, delayed rewards, periods of extended silence, and limited sensory input. Now, compare this evolutionary blueprint to modern digital life. We are subjected to thousands of stimuli per day, rapid content switching, going from tragedy in the news to a comedic video to an urgent work email in the span of 45 seconds. Constant novelty, continuous emotional triggers, dopamine loops, alerts, breaking news, instant validation from our peers. The brain is currently processing levels of stimulation the previous generations simply never encountered. And here is the critical public health piece. The human nervous system does not fully distinguish between important stimulation, like running from a predator, and non-stop stimulation, like a barrage of Slack messages and news alerts. Your brain still mounts a stress response. Your brain still pays a physiological cost. This cumulative cost is what we call allostatic load. It is the wear and tear on the body from chronic stress, which may help explain why so many people are walking into clinics reporting mental fatigue, concentration difficulties, emotional exhaustion, sleep disruptions, and irritability. We are diagnosing people with individual attention deficits when they are actually having a completely normal biological reaction to an abnormal hyperstimulating environment. And this becomes especially concerning for children and adolescents because developing brains are highly sensitive to environmental conditioning. Which brings me to one of the biggest public health questions of our time. What happens when childhood itself becomes commercialized through attention extraction? Children today are growing up inside environments designed to maximize engagement. Let me repeat that, because the distinction is vital. These systems are not designed to maximize learning. They are not designed to maximize emotional development. They are designed to maximize engagement. Algorithms do not optimize for human flourishing. They optimize for retention, time on platforms for clicks, behavioral predictability, advertising value. When young people spend years inside systems engineered around stimulation intensity, we are no longer just talking about a hobby. We are talking about behavioral infrastructure. This infrastructure fundamentally shapes attention patterns, reward processing, impulse control, social comparison, and identity formation. In public health, we would never ignore environmental exposure. We would never look at neighborhoods with polluted air or contaminated water and say, well, those kids just need to learn to breathe better. They just need more respiratory resilience. So why are we so reluctant in critically examining our cognitive environments? Why do we look at a generation drowning in algorithmic stimulation and say, you just need better screen time habits? Why are we placing the burdens of systemic failure squarely on the shoulders of families? Here's a strange thought. Boredom used to serve a vital psychological function. Boredom created space. It created the white space required for reflection, for creativity, imagination, problem solving, internal dialogue, and emotional processing. In neuroscience, there is something called the deficit mode network. It is a part of the brain that activates when you are doing nothing in particular. It is where empathy lives. It is where your sense of self is constructed. Now, boredom is treated almost like a medical emergency. The exact millisecond discomfort or stillness appears, stimulation is injected immediately. But constant stimulation interferes with the brain's ability to develop stillness. And stillness matters. Some of humanity's greatest insights, innovations, and social movements emerged from silence. Not from scrolling, not from constant input, but silence, observation, deep thought. Today, many people feel actively uncomfortable being alone with their own thoughts. I want to be very clear. That is not an individual weakness. That is an environmental adaptation. You have been trained out of stillness. What if the attention crisis is not just reducing our focus, but fundamentally changing the way human beings experience reality itself? This is exactly where public health needs to step into the arena. Traditionally, our field has focused heavily on infectious disease, chronic disease, tobacco, obesity, injury prevention, and physical environmental hazards. And those remain critically important. But increasingly, we are confronting behavioral ecosystems, digital ecosystems, information ecosystems. These ecosystems shape how outcomes just as aggressively as physical environments do. The challenge is that our public health frameworks move exponentially slower than technological change. Technology evolves by the week. Institutions evolve by the decade. And meanwhile, society adapts in real time, often without fully understanding the long-term consequences of that adaptation. We now live in a world where loneliness is increasing despite constant connectivity, where attention fragmentation is reducing productivity, where emotional exhaustion is just considered the normal cost of doing business, and digital overload is altering sleep, mood, and cognition on a population level. These are not personal lifestyle choices. These are structural public health concerns. Let us be very clear about something. Most major digital platforms are not neutral tools. The economic survival depends on sustained user engagement. That means these are enormous multi-billion-dollar incentives to maximize scrolling, emotional reaction, novelty, outrage, repetition, and personalization. The human brain is highly responsive to variable reward systems. A variable reward is exactly what a slot machine does. You pull the lever and you don't know if you are going to get something or nothing, or if you're going to hit the jackpot. That unpredictability is what creates addiction. Social platforms use the exact same architecture. You pull the feed down to refresh, you never know what the next scroll will bring. A like from a friend, an urgent email, a viral post, a shocking headline. That unpredictability keeps engagement incredibly high. This is not accidental. This is behavioral engineering. Public health has long studied industries that profit from behavioral dependence. We do it with big tobacco. We did it with the food industry, engineering hyper-palatable processed foods. This conversation about the attention economy belongs in that exact same tradition. Let's look at emotional regulation. One overlooked issue is that constant stimulation vastly reduces our opportunities for emotional processing. Think about this pattern. Many people now interrupt their own emotional discomfort immediately. You feel a twinge of sadness? Open an app. You feel stressed about a project? Scroll. You feel a wave of loneliness? Consume content. Anxiety? Seek immediate distraction. Obviously, technology itself is not inherently evil. It produces connection, education, accessibility, and incredible professional opportunities. I run a consultancy and a podcast using that exact technology. But when distraction becomes the primary coping mechanism for an entire population, that weakens emotional resilience over time. Because true psychological resilience develops through tolerating discomfort, sitting with it, processing it, not escaping it instantly through a glowing rectangle. We also need to talk about relationships. Look around a restaurant, look at the park, look at a living room. Many people are physically present, but cognitively elsewhere. Conversations are interrupted by notification. Meals are interrupted by scrolling. Families are sitting together on a couch, but they are individually absorbed in a separate digital reality. This attention fragmentation fundamentally changes social interaction, and we know unequivocally that social interaction is deeply connected to health outcomes. Research constantly shows that social connectedness affects morality, mortality, stress levels, cardiovascular health, and immune function. So when technologies reshape interpersonal attention, they are reshaping our biology. It matters deeply. If you are enjoying this conversation and if you are seeing these patterns in your own life or organization, make sure to subscribe to the Public Health Practice Gap on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And if you want the written companion to these episodes, subscribe to the NextGen Public Health Brief newsletter. Every Monday, we break down the public health trends, systems, and emerging issues shaping the future of society. Then every Tuesday, we expand those ideas right here on the podcast. You can also follow the work of NextGen Public Health Consultancy for speaking, advisory work, and public health strategy. We help organizations translate exactly what we are talking about today in a system-level strategy. All right, let's continue because this crisis does not stay at home. This attention crisis does not stay online. It follows people into the workplace. It follows them into classrooms, into healthcare systems, and into the C-suite. Organizations are increasingly struggling with burnout, fractured concentration, cognitive overload, meeting fatigue, and constant digital interruption. And here is the tragic irony. Many workplaces unintentionally amplify the exact problem they're trying to solve. Think about the modern organizational tech stack. Slack notifications, urgent emails, Microsoft Teams messages, texts from colleagues, endless Zoom meetings, alerts from project management dashboards, multiple screens, the unwritten expectation of continuous responsiveness. Workers are expected to maintain deep, high-level creative focus inside environments that are explicitly optimized for constant interruption. That contradiction is burning the workforce to the ground. You cannot expect deep work in a shallow environment. When we treat focus as an infinite resource that employers just need to manage better, we are ignoring the institutional architecture that is depleting them. Now, some people will push back on this entire premise. They argue humans always adapt to new technology. We adapted to the printing press. We adapted to television. We adapted to this and that. And yes, adaptation is real. Human beings are incredibly resilient, but adaptation is not always beneficial. Humans adapted to living in smog-filled cities. Humans adapted to eating ultra-processed foods. Humans adapted to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. We adapt to many toxic environments. The question for public health is not whether adaptation occurs. The question is what kind of adaptation is occurring and at what cost to humanity, our health, our potential. So, what do we actually do? How do we bridge the practice gap here? I don't think the solution is panic, and I definitely don't think the solution is pretending technology is inherently evil and retreating to the woods. The solution begins with awareness, environmental awareness, behavioral awareness, design awareness. We need to shift the conversation away from individual guilt and towards systemic architecture. We need real discussion about digital hygiene, intentional technology use, and workplace boundaries. But more importantly, we need policymakers, educators, and public health leaders to demand healthier digital ecosystems. Because attention shapes learning, it shapes empathy, it shapes productivity, creativity, and identity itself. Protecting human attention is going to become one of the defining public health and human rights challenges for the next decade. I want to leave you with this thought to carry you through the week. The most valuable resource in the modern world is no longer information. Information is cheap, it's abundant, it's everywhere. The most valuable resource in the modern world is uninterrupted attention. Because in a world built to distract us, the ability to focus becomes power. The ability to reflect becomes resistance. And the ability to think deeply becomes increasingly rare. So perhaps the real public health question is not simply, how much screen time do people have? But rather, what kind of human beings are we becoming inside environments of constant stimulation? That is the conversation we need to continue having. Thank you for listening to the Public Health Practice Gap. If today's episode challenged your thinking, or if it put words to a fatigue you've been feeling but couldn't quite articulate, share this episode. Send it to a colleague, an educator, a healthcare professional, or a friend navigating the realities of digital overload. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the NextGen Public Health Brief newsletter at nextgenpublichealthconsultancy.com for weekly insights and long-form analysis. Until next time, stay thoughtful, stay curious, and continue closing the gap between public health knowledge and public health practice. I am Dr. Bradley Fevrier. See you next week.